Perfect. We'll make sure. Anybody else tissues? Okay. Hello there, folks. Welcome. I want to thank you all for being here for the Morgan family today. Before we get started, if you wouldn't mind taking your phones out of your pockets and purses and putting them on silent, that way we can proceed uninterrupted today. We sure would appreciate that. And in a moment, we're going to let Celebrate Brian start the service for us. Again, thank you all for being here.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I know that it means a lot to the family. And in fact, Pete was saying a few moments ago that it's actually kind of nice to be able to see old friends and family that I haven't seen in a while. And I can only imagine that it would please Tom to be able to see all of you be able to show up to bring honor to his life. And I was able to talk to both the boys about their dad, and I understand that the things that he valued most on this side of heaven was his faith, family, friends, and all things aviation. I guess that was the part. I couldn't do much about getting a real plane in the building, but you can see that his love is represented. But it's so fitting that the friends and family are the ones to gather today. And I'm a big believer that every life is a story that deserves to be told. I absolutely believe that. And my privilege in coming alongside families like this is I get to meet a person that I've never met before. And the boys did such a great job of painting a picture for me of who Tom is and who he was and the impact that he's made. And so we're here today to do two things. We are here to mourn his loss, because whether you expect it or not, loss is hard. I mean, it just is. And so we're here to do that, but we're also here, more importantly, to celebrate and share his story. I mean, I'm a big believer in something I call holy collisions. And what I mean by that is that if you think back over the course of your life, there are certain times that you were able to run into the exact right person at the exact right time in your life for the exact right reason that you needed to run into that person. You may be sitting next to one of your holy collisions right now, and you go back and think about that first moment you met. Why did you meet? Who started the conversation? Why did it lead to a second conversation? And so on. And those are the most significant relationships of our life, are those holy collisions. Sometimes I think we're moving so fast through life that we may miss more of those collisions than we actually recognize. And I know that one of those holy collisions for Tom was meeting his wife, Susan, who we spent 53, years with. And I asked both boys if they knew the origin of how they met. Typical of boys, they had no idea. They just knew that it happened at some point. But that was supposed to happen. And what amazes me about that if they hadn't met back at UD or Wright Pat or wherever it was that they met, this group isn't even sitting here today. And when I have the privilege to do a service like this, please know that it is an honor for me to do this with you. I consider this group of people sitting in this room at this moment, we're our own version of a holy collision. There is no reason to explain why this particular group of people would ever be at the same place at the same time, other than whatever your connection is to Tom and the family. And let's be honest, when we all parked our cars here a little bit ago, every one of us had problems that we're dealing with, decisions we're trying to make, things that we're worried about, that maybe nobody else in this room even knows about. So my hope is that by the time we get back in our cars here in a little bit, we're all going to be a little bit better off because we took a time out to pay attention to Tom's story. Because from my understanding, he lived his life with a lot of energy. And he faced those times with a lot of energy and a lot of laughter. And I think we have the opportunity to learn from those life lessons as we go through this today. John chapter 14 says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me." And I'll be honest, I'm a believer, and on this side of heaven, I think the biggest challenge I've had is when the hard things happen, and sometimes I have to ask myself, do I really trust this is the best thing? And loss is one of those times. I mean, it's one of those times you have to sit back and wish that it wasn't the way that it was, but it is, so now I have to react to that. I have to deal with that. 82 years, frankly, is kind of hard for me to wrap my head around. That's a good, long life. Not long enough, but a good, long life. And a lot changed in this country and the way that we treat people and technology and everything else over the course of his lifetime. And we could not stay here long enough today to tell enough Tom stories or to have enough Tom memories to be able to wrap up 82 years. There's just no way. But the hope is that we can be here long enough to just start that. So you being here today, it could have been a handshake, a hug, seeing an old friend, all of those things. My belief is that God promised that when life gets tough, he will find ways to bring us comfort even beyond our ability to understand it. And so something today, I hope, is part of that answer. So if you're comfortable joining me, before I go any further, I'd like to ask you if you would to join me for a word of prayer. Okay, let's pray. God, thank you for bringing this special holy collision of friends and family together to be able to honor Tom's life and to celebrate his story. Every one of us in this room have people that are watching us and learning from us. And I pray that because of Tom and the way that he lived his life, that when we leave here today, we'll take a little bit closer look at the people who are counting on us. So thank you for the power of his legacy, for his story. And I pray that you would bring peace and comfort in this room here for these next few moments. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. You know, I think there's a big difference between being a human being and a human doing. And in our culture, we put a lot of emphasis on what it means to be a human doing. If you and I were to meet for the first time over coffee, we would probably ask each other in the first 60 seconds, what do you do? What did you do? Because we attach a lot of our identity comes from that. And I understand that Tom was a very successful and hardworking human doing. Both boys mentioned his absolute love for all things aviation, and he had an unbelievable 47-year career in and around the Wright Pat area. Started his own business in the aviation field. I'm a leadership consultant by my day job, and GE Aviation is my main client. And I know aviation people, they bleed aviation. They love all things that way. But that wasn't the sole content of his life. He was a lifelong member of Ascension Catholic Church. I understand his hobbies include he loved birding and spending as much time as he could in nature. And then the thing that Perry and I got a little sidetracked with, I understand he was an auto racing fan. And here in the latter years, a big NASCAR guy, which I am, but we got a little bit sidetracked on Formula One. I guess back in the day that Tom was a big Formula One fan, and we were too, and we got to talking about that. But that said a lot. I was an instant fan of Tom when I heard that part of his story. But that's all who he was as a human doing. I understand he liked to be busy, he liked to keep moving, he liked to be active with the family. But most of what I heard and what I saw in the pictures, I came early to watch the pictures. I think, unless I missed one, he was smiling at every single picture that I saw. And you know, there's something unique about a smile. I don't know if you know, some people smile, but their eyes don't know that they're happy. And I watched Tom's whole face. And that says a lot, because it says to me that he was in that moment. He wasn't looking for the next moment. He was in that, whatever that moment was. And there were a lot of different moments on that slideshow. And I hope they play it again here later, because that's a powerful memory. And what it does for me is it paints an even bigger picture of who he was as a human being. And that's our legacy. You know, what we do, what we buy, what we purchase, what we leave behind physically, that's wonderful. But it's who you are. You know, it's the example that we showed. And by all accounts, he showed that. I asked Perry, I said, if there were some words or phrases that would describe Tom, not only the way that you knew him, but the way that everybody else knew him, what are some things that would pop in your mind? And immediately, he said he loved to laugh. And he said he wasn't necessarily funny, he just liked to be around funny people. He really enjoyed being around people who were funny and an infectious kind of laugh. And I noticed especially that Pete had that same kind of laugh, and said he could talk your arm off about anything aviation. And I was fascinated because I saw that he was born in New York. And I love being around New York people. And I asked if that edge, that New York edge and accent was still there. And they said, oh, he could dig it up. You know, it was under the surface. But if he needed to, he could dig that old New York boy up. But what it taught him from a very early age that I thought was interesting is he accepted all people. He grew up in a very diverse community in New York, and that made an imprint on who he was as a human being. He didn't judge by color or status or anything else. He just loved people. And I'm like, when we talked about it, what better school could you have than to walk through life with that kind of an appreciation for all things human? And, when I was talking to Pete earlier, I heard a couple of more maybe quirkier things. I understand he had a very unique whistle that he could be heard across the neighborhood or in a crowded stadium. And it was a very distinct thing. I won't ask you to demonstrate that. What I am going to ask you to demonstrate is the second thing, though. I understand that he had perfected and mastered this one-hand clap thing. There you go. And I had asked him, was there any practical use for that skill that he had? But I did think of one, because in this day and age, you can check Facebook and applaud. So there is a practical use for that. But it just sounded like he just enjoyed life wherever he went. And then we shifted the conversation, because I said, I think we learn a lot about a person when times are good, obviously. I think we learn more about a person when we watch them go through a hard time. One of those defining moments of life. We really see what a person's made of. And I know that there's been illnesses. Boy said he was kind of lost after losing his wife. And my mom passed away a few years ago, and I identified that. My dad was just lost for 2 years. But he kept going. He kept smiling, and he kept moving on. And I know that one of the things we talked about was that both parents, Tom and Susan, suffered from some memory issues. And that's hard. That's hard. I believe on this side of heaven, that might be the hardest thing to face for a kid, for a child, of someone that you're loving. I remember back in high school, I didn't go to church, but I was part of this youth group, and we visited a local nursing home. Each one of us had a adoptive grandparent that we visited every Wednesday night. And my adopted grandma, her name was Charlotte. I'll never forget her. I visited her for two years every Wednesday night. And we became pretty close, but they didn't call it dementia or Alzheimer's back then, but she had memory issues, and it was always entertaining because you never knew what she was going to say. I mean, she had been the Queen of England. She had dated Elvis. She had been the First Lady at one point. And every Wednesday night when I was there at 6:30, the old TV show MASH was on. Remember MASH? And she would always point to one particular character played by McLean Stevenson and tell me that was her nephew. I mean, it was just one crazy story after another. I had known her for almost 2 years. And I walked in towards the end of her life, and I'm not making this up. I walked into her room. McLean Stevenson was sitting there because he really was her nephew. I'm like, maybe she was the Queen of England. But I say that because it's hard. And I respect it so much that, they know. There are times when the clouds part, and they know that you're there, they know that you're holding their hand, they know that you're talking to them. They may not be able to get it out, but I have every belief, and I believe today that they're in a place where there are no memory losses. There's no COVID, there's none of the stuff that we have to worry about on this side of heaven. And that's the hope that we hold on to today, and I know that's the hope that he had. In life, it is said, and I believe that we're born once, but we die 2 times. And the first time we die is a physical death. That has now happened at 82 years old. Let's be honest, it's going to happen to every one of us in this room. We don't know when, where, or how, but it's going to happen. But the second time we die, in my opinion, is more tragic, because the second time we die is the last time anybody ever says our name out loud. It's the last time anybody ever tells one of our stories. And it is up to this group to make sure that Tom never dies that second death. Get you a copy of this slideshow. I love it when we're able to do these slideshows because, grief is a messy thing. It's not as neat as the experts say. It's kind of messy. And there will be a day 17 months from now when you're going to think you're past it, but something's going to happen. Out of the blue, an F1 race will come on, or you may hear a soft applause and think that's a one-hand clapper out there. It could be anything. And it's going to remind you of him. And my advice is to stop whatever you're doing at that moment and let that moment do whatever that moment is supposed to do. take that moment and pop in this DVD and just let it, because these holy collisions, these important relationships, they should hurt. Because what the evil twin of grief is change. The story has changed now. There's a hole now where there was not one before. And so the best way to fill that hole is by friends and family. One of you may have a picture that no one else has. I remember about 2 months ago, somebody out of the blue sent me, they got my cell phone from my dad back in Illinois, and texted me a picture of my mom that I had never seen before. And it meant the world to me. So you may run across something that you can get to the family. And if you do, please do that, because that's the way that healing takes place. I'd like to close with a reading that I love to share. I hope it fits the way and the energy that Tom had in the way that he lived his life. And I'd like to close with this. It's part of a speech that Anna Quinlan gave to a group of graduates one afternoon. And I hope that it captures the energy that your dad lived his life with. She said, you walk out of here today with the only one thing that no one else has. There will be hundreds of people out there with your same degree. There will be thousands of people that do what you do for a living. But you will be the only person alive who has sole custody of your life, your particular life, your entire life. Not just your life at a desk or your life on a bus or in a car or at the computer. Not just the life of your mind, but the life of your heart. Not just your bank account, but your soul. People these days don't talk about the soul very much anymore because it's much easier to write a resume than it is to craft a spirit. But a resume is a cold comfort on a winter night, or when you're sad or broke or lonely, or when you've gotten back the test results and they're not so good. So she said, here's my resume. I'm a good parent. I try to love my kids and put them in the center of my life. I try to never let my profession stand in the way of being a good parent. I no longer consider myself the center of the universe. I show up, I listen, and I try to laugh. I'm a good friend to my spouse. I try to make my marriage vows mean what they say. I show up, I listen, and I try to laugh. I'm a good friend to my friends, and they are to me. Without them, there would be nothing to say to you today because I would simply be a cardboard cutout. So I call them on the phone when I can. I meet them for lunch. I show up, I listen, and I try to laugh. I would be rotten or at best mediocre at my work if those other things were not true, because you cannot really be first rate at your work if your work is all you are. So here's what I wanted to tell you today. Get a life. Get a real life. Not just a man in pursuit of the next promotion or a bigger paycheck or a larger house. Do you think you'd care so very much about those things if you blew an aneurysm one afternoon or found a lump in your breast? Get a life in which you're not alone, and find people that you can love and people that will love you back. And remember that love is not leisure. It is really hard work. So pick up the phone. Send an email. Write a letter, kiss your mom, hug your dad. Get a life in which you were generous and realize that life is the best thing ever and we have no business taking it for granted. It's so easy to exist instead of live, and I learned this many years ago because something really, really bad happened to me, something that if I had my choice would have never happened at all. But it has taught me the biggest lesson of my life. I learned to love the journey and not the destination. I learned that life is not a dress rehearsal, and today is the only guarantee that we get. So I do that by telling everybody I meet the following advice. Consider the lilies of the field. Look at the fuzz on the baby's ear. Read a book in the backyard with the sun shining in your face. And learn to be happy. And think of life as a terminal illness, because if you do, you will live it with joy and passion as it ought to be lived. And it sounds to me like that's the way that Tom was able to live his life. And there's no better legacy than that. And I know that if you share the kind of belief system that he did, that on a day like today, you don't have to say goodbye to your dad or your friend. You can simply say, we will see you later, and mean it. So thank you Sam and I, on our behalf, we want to thank you for letting us be part of your family circle today. It means a lot to us, and I'd like to close with a word of prayer, and we'll be done, okay? God, again, I thank you for taking this time to be able to share Tom and the way that he approached this life, and I can see a bit of that spirit in his sons. And I pray that legacy, that the way that he touched people over the course of his life will live well long past his 82 years. So as we get back in our cars today, God, my prayer is that each one of us would take a little bit closer look at the circle of people who were counting on us, and we would take Tom's legacy with us wherever we go. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thanks, Brian. This does conclude the service here today at the funeral home. In a moment, we're going to be going in procession over to Calvary Cemetery. So if you're joining us, please remember to turn on your bright headlights and emergency flashers. Otherwise, please travel safe on your way home. And I would just like to ask the pallbearers if you can meet me at the front of the room here once I conclude. That way we can talk about what we're going to be doing. Again, thank you all for being here today. Okay.